All right, let's get into this. You know, some ideas aren't just, well, ideas. They're more like tools, lenses, really, powerful enough to actually shape empires and define the lives of millions. Today, we're going to take a close look at one of the most influential and honestly controversial of them all, a concept called Orientalism.
So, to really get a grip on this, I want you to picture something. Let's travel back in time. The year is 1910. We're in the British House of Commons. A former prime minister, a guy named Arthur Balfour, gets up to speak. He's there to defend Britain's occupation of Egypt, and he's got a pretty bold defense ready.
I mean, just listen to that, the sheer confidence in that statement. He's not just arguing that Britain is more powerful in a military sense. No, he's arguing that Britain knows better. This whole idea wasn't just about armies and navies. It was about the authority that comes from knowledge, an absolute, unwavering belief in their own intellectual supremacy.
So, you have to ask yourself, right? Where does that kind of certainty even come from? Was it just one man's arrogance? Or was it something deeper? A whole structured way of thinking that made his statement sound not just reasonable, but completely obvious to everyone in that room?
Well, it turns out it was something deeper. And decades later, a scholar named Edward Said would finally give that system of thought a name. And in doing so, he would completely change how we think about the connection between knowledge and power. In his truly groundbreaking 1978 book, simply titled Orientalism, Said basically laid it all out. He argued that what Balfour was expressing wasn't just a personal opinion, it was the result of a long, powerful, and systematic tradition, a specific way the West had learned to see, to study, and ultimately to rule the East. And this is Said's core definition right here, and it's so important. This isn't just about admiring Eastern art or, studying ancient texts. For Said, Orientalism is an active force. Look at those verbs: dominating, restructuring, having authority. It's a tool, it's a style for exerting control. Said explained that this whole thing works on 3 levels, and they're all connected. First up, you've got the academic field. These were actual scholars who called themselves Orientalists. Then there's a more general style of thought, this basic fundamental split between the Orient and the Occident, East and West. And finally, you combine those first two, and what do you get? An institution of power, a whole system for managing and controlling the Orient. And all of this really boils down to that famous idea, right? That knowledge is power. Orientalism wasn't about collecting random facts. It was about creating a specific kind of knowledge that made imperial control not only possible, but also seem perfectly justified. You know who summed this up perfectly? Another British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli. He said, "The East is a career." Think about that for a second. What does that even mean? Well, Said argues it means the Orient was seen as a kind of stage, a place where an ambitious Westerner could go to act, to study, to rule, and ultimately to build their entire legacy.
So, how did this actually work in practice? Well, it was all about taking the immense, incredible diversity of countless cultures and peoples and just, squashing it all down, boiling it into one single, fixed, timeless idea: the Oriental. This abstract person was defined by a neat little list of characteristics that you could study, predict, and therefore control.
And here is a perfect, almost jaw-dropping example of that logic. These are the words of Lord Cromer, who was basically the ruler of Egypt for Britain. On one hand, you have the European, a natural logician, whose mind is like a piece of mechanism. And on the other, the Oriental. His mind lacks symmetry, his reasoning is slipshod. For guys like Cromer, this wasn't just some casual prejudice. No, this was a practical, working theory for how to govern. This brings us to what Said really saw as the central injustice of this whole system. It's the power not just to describe other people, but to represent them, to actually speak for an entire region and all its inhabitants. There's a reason Edward Said chose this quote from Karl Marx to put right at the beginning of his book. It's because it captures the core assumption perfectly. The idea is that the Oriental is somehow silent, passive, unable to speak for himself. And because of that, the Western Orientalist has to step in and do it for him, defining his reality for him. Said actually had a specific name for this unique position. He called it exteriority. It sounds a bit academic, I know, but the idea is actually simple. The authority of the expert didn't come from being part of the culture. Just the opposite. It came from the very fact that he was an outsider, standing apart, looking in. And his descriptions, They weren't for the people he was describing. They were packaged up for a Western audience, reinforcing that specific worldview. Okay, so if this way of thinking is so deeply baked into our history and our culture, what's the alternative? What do you do? For Said, the answer wasn't just to, get your facts straight. It required a really conscious and critical process of unlearning. What he proposed instead was a fundamentally humanistic alternative. It's about completely flipping the script. He argued for replacing what he called the will to dominate with a will to simply understand. So the goal shouldn't be to categorize and control other cultures. The goal should be to study them with the genuine aim of coexistence and mutual respect.
And this is the really profound question that Said leaves on the table for all of us, and it feels more relevant today than ever. How do we engage with other cultures without falling back into those old, easy patterns of power? It's a challenge to all of us to look past the simple labels, to reject the easy black and white thinking, and to really try to see the complex, shared human reality that lies underneath it all.